Call to order the meeting for Wednesday, April 30th. May I have roll call, please?
Mayor Allen,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem
Present.
Commissioner Taylor,
Present.
Commissioner Crowley,
Present.
and Commissioner Skidmore.
Present.
We are all here. I'd like to welcome everyone here in the audience in our different room here, as well as everyone watching or listening at home. We will start today's meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the invocation by Commissioner Skidmore.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, let's pray. Father in heaven, we just give you thanks for everyone here and for this gathering. We just give you thanks for our community, our city, the way we all work together to make this place a better place. And now, Lord, as we look over this agenda and items on here, and the decisions that we make, we just ask for your direct guidance and that we may yield to your will and submit to your perfect plan for all of us. We just commit this time to you and give you thanks for all these and thank you in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you, Commissioner Skidmore. We will start with public comments. Do we have any registered today? We have no appointments, proclamations, recognitions. We will move on to item 8, which is the consent agenda, which includes minutes from the April 23rd, 2025 meeting, reappointments to city boards and commissions, and the agenda approval. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a
I'll
second?
second.
All in favor, say aye.
Batting.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. We'll go on to the declaration. At this time, I'd like to give the commissioners a chance to declare any conflict or communication they've had that might influence their ability to consider today's issues impartially. Seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to unfinished business. We have our discussion on board interviews. We had a couple interviews last week and some more before that. And we will need to pick applicants for, we have one to pick for Accessibility Advisory Board, and we have one to pick for the Library Board. Commissioner Kaler, we had voted at the end of the meeting last week, and we had a tie between Cole and Kelly for the Accessibility Advisory Board. And if everybody's votes still stand how they were, if you can submit your vote and we will break that tie.
Yeah, Mayor Allen, thank you. I'm happy to participate in a vote today. I would assume that we would all be voting again.
That's fine. How would you vote for the Accessibility Advisory Board?
Or we're all voting again, correct?
We can. How would you vote?
Yeah, so we should all vote again. So it shouldn't just be me that is voting because
Yes,
vote, it's a new vote.
Yes. I'm asking how you would vote. What is your vote?
My vote would be, geez, that's really hard.
Commissioner Kaler, just so you know, we did approve Andrea Morrow last week, just if that matters to your opinion.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for that information. I would, do we have openings come up the following year? Can somebody attest to that information? I always hate when, or I dislike when we have to not choose someone who has brought themselves forward, because they're obviously willing to give up their time and their talent. And I think both of these individuals have tremendous insight that they can give the Accessibility Advisory Board. We've used this board in a kind of a whole bunch of different realms in the time. In fact, I think it was developed, Commissioner Skidmore, I think it was developed when you and I were on together early on. And so I think this board's been around for over 10 years. And I'm not sure that we've used it to its fullest capacity. And so is there a range of board members, or we have a straight number of board members that we've agreed to? Because I know that there are other boards that have a range of board members. Does this one not?
Does anyone have the list handy?
Yeah, we have we have, I'll just run through all of our boards and our current, vacancies. We have the Accessibility Advisory Board, which serves a 3-year term, and we have two current openings. I'm sorry, we now have 2 applicants with 1 remaining opening. The Board of Zoning Appeals, we have 1 opening for a 3-year term for a city residency. We are not voting on that today. We have 1 opening for outside the city limits, but within the zoning area of influence for 3 miles for extraterritorial zoning. We have some Construction Board of Appeals, again, not under consideration here, but we have an opening for the Electrician Board and the HVAC Board, and they must work within the city limits. And we have 1 opening for the Library Board, which is under consideration today for a 4-year term. And we have 2 non-resident, again, within the city's area of influence for zoning outside of our jurisdiction. And we have 2 openings for that for 3-year terms.
So, when I'm pulling it up, because I can pull it up on the internet and look at it, and it looks like we
Yes.
have 4 positions that were available. Which ones had we or we have, which individuals that they would reserve? I show Daniel Brown, John Fritz, Ashley Gillespie, and Kyle Trindle as having terms expiring this year.
Yes,
My understanding is that they would be.
those are
Such a big group.
correct. And that is the consent
Except
agenda.
for, did she list Kyle Frendel?
Yeah.
Kyle Frendel was stepped down.
Yeah.
So there's an open seat.
An open seat that's left open by Kyle.
One for him and then 1 other seat.
Mm-hmm. And so then the others, Daniel, John, and Ashley, have agreed to serve again?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm not about taking people off, but I'm not sure because this isn't a, and possibly our city attorney can weigh in on this. I mean, is there a reason that we have to, I mean, we don't want a board, a good board, a huge board is hard to run. And it's hard to manage and it's hard to move forward with policy on those things. But is there a reason that we can't take both of these individuals? It's not statute based, this accessibility advisory board.
We have an ordinance.
How many current members are there of the committee?
One,
So,
7, if you count Kyle would be the 8th, which his term is expired.
the ordinance is not less than 5, no more than 9.
No
So
more
this
than what?
council can keep an odd number. Not less than 5 members, nor more than 9.
You're talking about accessibility.
The accessibility advisory board,
Yeah,
5, nor more than 9. So you could have somewhere between 5 and 9. And it sounds like you have 7 currently.
yeah, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I count 7. Kyle would be an 8th. And then there's a possibility to have 2. So we take,
Andrea would make 8.
Yeah, we appointed Andrea. Is that she counted in that number?
no, she is not. I'm looking at what is available on our website.
Yeah, we appointed her last week, so she needs counted in that number.
Okay, then there's still an opportunity to take, okay, so yeah, I see what you're saying. So there's.
Yeah,
There's
opportunity to
1
take
spot
one at a-
remaining with Nicole Hitchcock and Kelly Whitaker for consideration for the remaining position.
No, what is it? 9.
You know, honestly, that's really too bad because both of them are great and I hate to choose one or the other. I guess I mean, I understand that you want an odd number for voting, but they're not voting to create policy. So, I mean, just a thought.
Believe that, take a change of the ordinance to make it 10.
Yeah, the number is set by ordinance. You have to change the ordinance to increase the size of the board.
I see what Sarah's saying that when we got quality people applying for these positions, and, I don't know if they would be willing to serve on another board, the one we don't select today. I don't know if there's any other board that's close to, really isn't anything close to accessibility advisory, but if there's some other position, I agree. When you got quality people applying for a volunteer position, it's hard to say no. Any one of them.
I mean, anything that they would bring to the city commission would require our vote. And obviously we have an odd number for a reason. But I mean, in order to create policy, that would have to come before us. This is,
Correct. It is the function or the role of the the advisory board for the accessibility advisory board is to essentially advise and make recommendations
right.
to the commission regarding accessibility of city buildings, properties, green spaces, public right of way, and to provide technical assistance, related to service to, disabled or, mobility impaired populations.
So just as a point of reference, and Blaine, you can certainly key in on this if I'm wrong on this one, but that's part of the reason that we have the bumps. When you come to the on Main Street, when you go to cross the street, somebody from the Accessibility Advisory Board, they discussed it, and that was the reason that we added those. And I have heartache saying like more eyes is a bad thing with accessibility if we're just considering two people. But
Do we have an advisor, a non-voting advisor? That would be a violation of an ordinance or not, but it's a non-voting advisor to the.
yeah,
Well,
Yeah, but if somebody gonna wanna go sit at a meeting, if their vote doesn't matter.
That would be a question of the third person.
I mean, is there an alternate opportunity? I mean, if we don't have everybody that shows up every time, I mean, I am fully aware that I'm not present in the room today. Although, I mean, we don't always show up at every time. Can there be an alternate? I mean, I'm trying to figure out how can we engage more citizens and not get to saying yes and not saying, no, we don't know.
but I think if we did it for this board, I feel like we're doing that then for every board, every time we have more people than we have board spaces open. And I feel like that's also not necessarily something we would want to do.
I think we do it on
I think,
a case
I think-
basis, and we can do it if it's
Yeah.
established.
I think that gets unfair. And then I also think it's our job to go to these people and tell them we appreciate them applying and make them aware of any other open positions. And anytime an opening comes up that they may not see, make sure they know about it, or make sure they know about other places in town like Ottawa Main Street that they can serve on the board, or other boards that may have openings that would keep them involved.
With all due respect, Mayor, that's been our approach for 14 years now, at least in the time that I've been on. And I don't know that that's the right approach.
Do we have, City Attorney Finch, for these people, for their reappointments, is there any process, or do they basically just say, hey, I'm willing to serve again? I think I would rather, instead of expanding it, look at potentially as people are gonna be reappointed, almost evaluating the board, it's, those people as well, and maybe there is a better fit, or something along that maybe someone hasn't made enough meetings, or something along those lines that we could look at.
I think when I'm looking at the list here, I think Kyle Trendle was probably on the original, because 2013 was when,
13 was when he
Yeah.
started,
so I think he was probably on the original board. Marcia Hermrich has been on since 2017, and John Fritz has been on there since 2019. And I'm not saying they absolutely bring value, and they bring some historic value too to how this board has worked in the past. I'm just thinking.
I was just going to say, and I'll let the city attorney speak in greater detail, but I know that many of our boards have a kind of like a term limit of 2 appointments or 3 appointments, and it's capped at that. Unfortunately, I don't have ordinance 38, 35, 13 in front of me to be able to determine whether or not that was in fact the case with this ordinance, but judging from some of the reappointments, I don't believe that's the case, or that it applies here. but it's something that we could certainly look at drafting and bringing back to the commission for further consideration.
So to answer your questions, the board is made up of no less than 5, no more than 9. They serve 3-year terms. Theoretically, with a 9-member board, you'd be rotating 3 members every time. There is no term limit contained in the municipal code for this board. The requirements are that I think you have not less than half the members are people with a disability, so that you have that perspective of people in the community who are dealing with accommodations and accessibility issues on a daily basis. I know in the past, the practice has been that if someone is on a board and they're not term limited off, they typically are. To your question, Commissioner Clayton, if you all want to change that practice, you certainly can and say, hey, we want to treat that as a new appointment each time. That is an option. Here, in this case, where you have more applicants than you have positions, I would argue to you that that's a good problem to have. The alternative is that you don't have enough people to fill the board. And I believe that you do have the opportunity next year to appoint 3 more positions here. And you can certainly, if you want us to bring in an ordinance that puts a term limit here and says no more than 2 consecutive terms or something like that, we can do that for you. In order to change the number of the makeup of want us to do too.
I am certainly not interested in any kind of term limits on this board. The problem we have today may not be a problem we have tomorrow.
I agree. I think that we've been trying to fill, I feel like this position for a while. Like, I feel like this board has had an open position for a while. And if I feel like we start limiting people even more, then it's going to be worse.
Well, if nothing else, the people that we've been discussing, hearing this and realize the value they bring to us, either one of them, we couldn't lose it either one. That's the great thing about this decision. I'm in favor of go ahead and leave it like it is. Pick one and we'll.
So if we would like to revote, last time I had voted for Nicole. I think they're both great. I think they would both do an amazing job. I like her perspective in the job that she works and how that would apply to this. So I'm going to keep my vote with Nicole.
I too will keep my vote the same with Mrs. Whitaker.
Okay.
I'll follow suit. I'll keep the same with Nicole. Again, both are great applicants. All 3 were great. I think all 3 would be terrific for the board. And we appreciate people, as Commissioner Kaler's mentioned, applying for these boards, but I will vote for Nicole. I'll keep my vote with Kelly.
And Commissioner Kaler, Kelly Whitaker.
Okay, so we will appoint Ms. Whitaker to the Accessibility Advisory Board, and we will let her know.
Library board.
Yep, and then we have our library board. We had, we can all vote on that one if you would like. I know, Eric, you had voted for Patrice the first time. Are you going to keep your vote the
I'll
same?
keep my vote the same.
Okay. And I had voted for David. I'm going to keep my vote the same. I liked his perspective. Mike, you had voted for Joanne. Okay. And Zach, you had voted for Joanne. So
Correct.
Joanne had 2. So Commissioner Kaler.
I too will vote for Joanne.
Okay, so we will appoint Joanne Nowatzki to the library board, and we will let her know that one as well.
We will contact the people who want to select it. Is that something?
We will.
And I do know that there is potentially an opening on the OMA. Is that right? No, not right now. Okay, dang. We'll try again next time.
Sure. Appreciation.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I'll make the motion
Okay,
that we appoint Kelly Whitaker to the Accessibility Advisory Board and Joanne Nowatzki to the Library Board.
do we have a second? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone, for applying and interviewing for these positions. It's a lot coming in front of everyone and doing that, so it definitely takes guts and caring for our community, so we appreciate you. We will move on to new business. We'll start with item 11A.
Discussion of city commission philosophy on Ottawa's development.
A discussion to pursue alignment between departmental operations and the broader strategic vision of the organization, city commission goals and priorities, and community values. We will have Director Neese and Joe Metz with DBA. Comet. Dang, okay. Okay, if you want to come on up, you're welcome to come on up to the table. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, and I think we're looking for Joe to lead this conversation for us. He's done a good job putting together presentation and questions that should hopefully bring the conversation forward.
Yep, well, thanks for sitting next to me so I can give you the hard question. Elected officials, city manager, appointed staff, pleasure to be with you. This is a cozier venue than the last time. Sounds like there's some construction going on next door, and I think you'll be happy with the results. So, brief introduction, they had given it last time, but I'll make it briefer than last time. I've been with GBA for 6 years. I'm a fire protection engineer in Kansas. And we provide building code and development assistance for jurisdictions throughout Missouri and Kansas. I serve on the planning commission where I live in Roland Park. I'm a very pro-development individual, but work and play. So I'm very honored to be invited to kind of lead the discussion based around you as commissioners and what you're representing in your community. Commissioner Skidmore, echoing what you mentioned in our opening prayer about what's right for your community. I think that could really guide our conversation really well. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach to codes and zoning ordinances and things of that nature. And certainly in the state of Kansas, where it is considered a home rule state, even more of the keys, proverbial keys to the car can be handed down on the municipal level. So I think that's the goal here. I have 6 guiding questions that we could take in order. I imagine that with a large elephant to eat of an idea of development, there may be a lot of strongly held opinions that may not fit neatly into any of these categories, and I welcome those as well too. My goal here would be to flex as much of your thoughts as possible and really get some tangible to-dos. As a point of clarification, in the background, there's a couple that are already in the works, yet to be kind of finalized, that we'll probably reference as we continue throughout our conversation. So with that, first topic that I have here, is this the first one?
The first was, I thought,
We skipped
the
one.
permit process
Yeah, permit
timelines
process.
and expectations.
It was up there and then
Got it. Oh, that's okay.
Back one more.
Other presenters there. Are there 2 of us running it?
I think
there
so.
you
There we go.
go.
Didn't know if you were gonna operate or not.
I'll try.
A game of chicken, there we go. So permit process, the name of the game in a lot of communities, similar to Ottawa in size and spirit of the community. Quick to market is a phrase that I've heard in a lot of communities similar to yours. I think that's wise. That will be development that happens in your jurisdiction as opposed to somewhere else. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you've heard from folks in the public about what it takes to get a permit here in Ottawa. Are there significant barriers that are encountered? Any specific examples will be helpful throughout our conversations with any of those. Of course, you don't have to remember by heart any permit numbers. Of course, not asking that, but any type of that data I think would be really helpful as we kind of craft the game plan. So.
Well, I know in front of the whole commission a couple weeks ago, we had a builder come and he had a problem receiving a permit, and that issue, it sounds like, has been fixed. So I'm not sure if there's any need for ongoing discussion about that, but I know timing was an issue. It had taken much longer than he had thought it would, and that, you know, that costs them money, obviously, so. And that's kind of what personally I've heard. I'm not in the business, obviously, and I don't know as much as somebody who deals with those, with living permits and things every day, but from what I hear, it's how long it takes. And I don't have specifics on that, but just generally how long it takes to get the permit. And then sometimes it can be, permits for, similar things that they've done in the past, and there's no kind of expediting it or anything like that for very similar.
Thank you.
I think one of the ones that I've seen kind of personally, professionally, and then also hearing from folks, kind of taking a bite at the elephant, they actually would be exempt from a permit if we didn't delete the exceptions from the IRC code. Decks under 30 feet or 30 inches, not 30 feet, 30 inches in height from ground that are under 200 square feet, and sheds that are under 200 square feet. Most, maybe not most jurisdictions, but in the code, it is built in that those things do not need a permit. And potentially if those, maybe even fences, that's an exception in there, helps with workload even a little bit, that may help to churn on getting other things through quicker. So just to kind of throw that in the ring, that I know 2018 code was adopted a couple of years ago now. And not that I'm saying we need to delete those or not delete those exceptions, but just maybe as a point of conversation, we can kind of see, even at some point, get statistics on how many of these sheds are 12 by 14 sheds that are under 200 square feet. How many of them are, a deck that it's from someone's front stoop that's 6 by 6, that doesn't need a full permit process, that's adding time to staff and kind of making this review process a little longer as well.
Excellent comments. Yeah, I'll chime in on those if I will. That is one of those wheels that are currently turning about kind of an evaluation. I've heard a lot of references to what we in the building code world would categorize as IRC, residential code. And if that is kind of a large portion of where a lot of this feedback can be coming, that is helpful information because that could kind of be directed, those efforts could kind of be more directed towards IRC efforts. I will say that permit exemptions list is one of the most often amended sections out in the public and municipalities, specifically if there is data alluding to EnerGov, which I'm sure will be a topic of our conversation here as well too, and how that tool can and should be used. Some of that data is logged in a report that can be pulled. How big are these accessory structures? If they are all 201 square feet, now is there a need to take a second look at what's required as a part of that specific type of permit application, and the repeatability I heard there too. If it's similar work that has been reviewed and approved, isn't it beneficial? Potentially big asterisk there, because there's a lot of things that can change in the code world. The butterfly flaps its wings. The same shed that wasn't in an easement before could be in an easement. So they're, what to the naked eye might look like no changes or very few changes could have some, but does that necessarily need to burden down the permit process is a valid question, I would say. So, excellent. Any other thoughts on?
So Joe, from somebody who has worked all over, I've been in Nebraska, I've been in Missouri, I've been in Pensacola, Florida, up and down the East Coast. Everybody will tell you that every community development department is difficult to work with. I can tell you that ours isn't as bad as it's made out to be. Are there flaws? Absolutely. And I'm hoping that this discussion is what's going to help kind of iron out these flaws to make things a little bit more easier to get some stuff done in town. One of the efficiency things that I've come into contact with some of the contractors is we have some individuals in town that build the same house or similar houses over and over and over. I don't understand why we have to keep resubmitting the same plan for GBA to review when that plan has already been reviewed and approved. I can understand the site plan. Certainly we want to make sure that they're not obstructing any easements or too close to the layout of the land, but I don't think it's a need for GBA to review those plans. Now, yes, if something structural is changed, certainly that should happen. But to me, this would expedite a lot of building because it's a plan that's already been approved. Resubmit the same plan, staff reviews it, make sure the site plan works out, and we have a permit within a few days instead of a few weeks. And I've said this a lot of times. to somebody who works in construction, a lot of these guys don't get paid till the job's done. And so if we delay their pay for a couple weeks, we gotta, that's not fair to them. And I always say, how would we feel as staff if our pay was delayed 2 weeks? So that, I know this is what we're calling a discussion, but I almost want an answer to that today. I mean, can we just approve a plan, whether it's master plan A and master plan B, and say every time you submit master plan A, you're good to go as long as it fits your site plan?
Yeah.
Can we do that for master plan B? I mean, like I said, we have 3 or 4 builders in this town that are building the same houses over and over, and hardly any changes. And to me, that's certainly, gonna help with efficiency.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, at the National League of Cities Convention we attended in Washington DC, I went to kind of a community development and that was really like the lowest hanging fruit that they talked about was neighborhoods around the country. And some of those were even almost, in larger cities were specific to certain areas within the town, but having approved plans. Some cities went as far as having the city owns blueprints. And someone says, I want to build in this neighborhood, they get to pick from 3 houses, they say, I want that one, and they roll. Because it's already been approved, it's already gone through, and I think kind of bang for your buck, that could be something that I think could really help builders and those folks.
Well, I'll go back to the comment that I made, we were told recently we need 344 houses in this town. And hopefully, more, once Proximity Park kicks off. So, we certainly don't want to, put roadblocks in the way of these individuals. And most of these individuals are residents of our town. These aren't outside builders. These are guys that are committed to our community, not just financially. So, to show them some grace with doing something like that, I think would be beneficial.
Absolutely. Excellent questions. Would love to actually, provide an answer here. I think that that's a very reasonable approach. I will say that would put you in an elite class with other peers. But from what I'm aware of, some of the towns that you'd be punching above your weight a little bit, which is a good comment. My previous role was a plan reviewer at the city of KCMO, and the master plan program there was, they were building hundreds and hundreds of homes. And so it was more complex of a process, which is an advantage here if there's a master plan program. You already caught all of the snags that any master plan program has. It's a different site plan for each, but a pre-approved plan that structural engineer and architect are taking responsibility for the design one time. And yes, you also referenced the other part of that is that potentially municipalities, if it's part of allocated budgets, could hire their own design professional to take responsibility for the design. It meets the adopted codes and all the amendments. And then someone from the public can pick that off the shelf and get to a builder and then no architect or engineers involved, or at the very least needing to be a cost passed on to that particular resident. I do think that also lends itself to a higher level of development in the community because the expectations are better. Their time and effort is not spent on picking apart what the design was hoping to mean or intend, but that more eyes that are looking at a master plan at the beginning, and ounce of prevention, pound of cure, and that is very much how a master plan finds its benefits. So.
Well, and I think some of the problem that's delayed the permitting process on these houses has been that sometimes it's sent to GBA and maybe one person reviews it and says, hey, you're good to go. The same plan is sent, the next time it's built, and another person at GBA looks at it and says, well, wait a minute, we need you to respond to this, this, and this, and they turn around and say, well, wait a minute, you just approved this plan, and I've done nothing different.
Sure.
So, and there's nothing wrong with any individual, reviewing the plan and finding maybe flaws in it, but if it's been approved before, how could there be flaws the second time? So, and I understand it. As an electrician, I can go in after another electrician and find flaws that they've done. So I understand it completely. I just think it's completely more efficient if we just approve one and move forward.
I think that's a valid point. That is often discussed in our office, so especially if it's a similar plan that's submitted. The more cracks you get, or more bites you get at the apple, the more opportunity you might find some things that you might have missed in the first round. My staff is human, but we also pride ourselves in being technical professionals. So it's certainly not a part of the plan for something like that to happen on any plan review. That will happen on, especially as it applies to commercial projects that I preach to our plan review members. It's a not a dedicated role on our team. They're architects and engineers that will provide plan review services for the team that I lead. But on the second plan review, they might find something that they didn't find the first time. And my goodness, that is not a helpful thing to uncover and unearth. So what we found, and I believe that there's a project that's upcoming where it might be a good candidate for. We've started a process where we actually hop on a call with the architects and engineers to walk through those comments one by one to make sure their expectations are being met. Even if any of those have popped up since that first review, that everybody's on the same page so that when resubmittal comes in, it's approved. So things like that, and that's apples and oranges from residential and commercial. deviates a little bit from your comment, but you're right that if I'm remembering right, the initial plans that were submitted, there were some other items that had been uncovered about energy and what the adopted amendments had said. And so I think hammering those down between those plan submittals is kind of the result of that. But really, hopefully our staff is kind of taking that as a learning experience. And our goal is not to find new things on each iteration of the same plan submittal.
Kind of following along with that train of thought, I like, you mentioned home rule in Kansas, it's great, you know, mentioned House Bill 2088.
Yes.
And the timeline on that, one, I definitely think our county should be a little more aggressive. Kind of your opinion, state statute, KSA 74-7033, in the exceptions that single family and duplexes, accessory structures do not need to be engineered. Could you kind of expand upon that?
Yeah.
And kind of where that fits, where does that fit in our review here? If someone's building a single family home, where does that kind of play a role?
Excellent question. Yes. So an often cited state statute, I think it's a very in the spirit of the home rule and trying to avoid design professionals where not necessarily required. So most jurisdictions, when doing research and discussing with other municipalities in Kansas, the often accepted definition of that state statute is relating to the residential code and what can be built prescriptively. We call the IRC the cookbook. You should be able to make a pizza that, you know, all the ingredients that are listed there. Where that becomes tricky is any sort of engineered product, typically steel beams, LVLs, PSLs, LSLs, I-joists, truss packages, things like that, all are required in administrative chapter of the IRC to be engineered and designed. With the exception, and again, largely the interpretation is with agricultural buildings that are accessory in a residential environment, not a commercial. So I think that lends itself really well to that. But most homes that are being built right now don't. They use one or two of those engineered products, and that really, it's the types of homes that are popular. But large open spaces lend itself to traditional sawn lumber not being able to carry the load, and it's been cost prohibitive to do so. So an engineered product is economical, but required to be designed. So I think that there are some ways in which good communication with designers can find some ahead of time before a permit application. If we were planning on doing this, that, or the other, is there a way in which we could save the homeowner some design fee? I think it's a reasonable way to do it. But that's the common interpretation. But again, in the spirit of what's right for your community, I'll provide you my interpretation of the code and what I believe it says and what other folks think that it means. But after that, it's kind of to community.
Yeah. So in that, the whole structure, if you have your stick building, following IRC, span charts, everything that, but you have a truss package. Truss package is stamped. Does the whole house, the whole design need engineered as well? Is that what is, you know, or when we say that if there is something that is engineered, LVL, those types of things, it would behoove me almost from a time standpoint or cost probably to not do trusses and just stick build it. And so I guess kind of like where in that does that leeway, since that document is stamped, you know, LVLs are a little different. It's more manufacturer spec. It's not specific to that blueprint.
That's right.
You know, is that, or is it more steel and LVLs that kind of bump it into that, or is anything being engineered kind of
But yeah, of course, from the approach at GVA, we take what I've interpreted as a conservative approach, anything that's not restrictive in the IRC. All of those charts are sawn lumber that can be looked up. Here's your span, here's your distance, all that. And it, you know, with this type of lumber, all of that can be done out in the field. And inspector used to take a lot longer to inspect homes because they were looking at the charts to see if the spans were right, because there were no plans on site. That's just, the culture has changed a lot with permitting in the past 25 years, probably. And some builders do take the approach of, especially smaller homes, because even if those larger spans in the great rooms, that can be accomplished by a triple 2x12 or something like that. Or 12-inch on center instead of 16. So there are ways to do that. That still involves some design, but it does not necessarily require that to be a signed and sealed copy submitted to the city. So some analysis is to be performed. But not necessarily the fee associated with it. So that helps with that. Good questions.
My question for the comment, I guess, would be more of a philosophy. I'm not a builder, so I don't know LDL if I've had to do cholesterol.
Oh, sure.
That's LDL. But my support, I've talked to quite a few people over the years, and it's been over the years. And I just kind of, not for verbatim, but what I gather from them is this feeling, and it compared to my profession, or retired from profession, I've been in the business for over 40 years. So when a customer came into the bank, my first thought is, yes, how can I do this deal? I can make this one. And then I let the financials tell me yes or no. You have to do a complete review. So I kind of feel like some people have said they feel like the answer is no when they, and I've heard, and I understand sometimes recently too, people have come in and you guys have said, no, we can't do this, but we can do this. Oh, that's manageable. And I appreciate that we get suggestions along the way. Yeah, this can't, but we can do this. And also, I feel like being in a competitive banking environment like it was, city employees really, we don't have to compete with anybody. Think about it. Any of our utility departments or any department, police or whatever you look at, there's no, I don't know, I said, our citizens, I should feel like be treated like customers where they could go somewhere else to get a permit. So they go to some part. And then that's why I think I like to treat our citizens like customers coming into a business where it's a competitive environment.
And Commissioner, there's no doubt that that we sometimes fall short, but I think I speak for myself and I think for the staff. We're very aware that there are opportunities. So we do know that folks could be choosing to build somewhere else. They're choosing to build an office.
And that's good. And I appreciate that. My point was, I know they want to build one here, and I just think that they can't go to the market perfectly. Sure, if they could, maybe they would. Less restrictive or cheaper or whatever. So I just think we have to always look at all of our citizens like treat them like customers. That's what I'm thinking. But yeah, that's a kind of a philosophy. Great to.
Absolutely. I know I've taken a lot of time and I would be happy to get the Oscars music to sing me off the stage whenever appropriate. I think we've hit a lot of the most important high points here. And so until that music plays, I think the customer satisfaction is a huge one and is not happening in a lot of communities. One idea that in kind of preparing for this that kind of spawned was some sort of permit applicant satisfaction survey after a permit's been closed out or after a permit's been issued. What was your experience with the process, general comments, just feedback from the community so that that's a constant influx. Of course, you know, not you get that when talking to the cable company. It doesn't have to be every time. I'm sure we can figure out the details, but I think some real feedback so that trying to develop some empathy of what it's like to be on the other side of the table. I think could go a long way for any department, and I think that would be really a wise value add for development here.
I can tell you, these two commissioners right here that are on the job site hear all the time about permit application, you know, how they're happy and not happy about it. So we certainly relay what's out on the job site, because we're the first to hear about it.
Right.
I mean, whether we're hired hands and just on the job site and because of our role here, we get that information, or if they seek us out, we hear it and we pass it along. I do for sure. I'm sure you do too, Commissioner Clayton.
Yeah, keep it coming, what I'd say. I really think it's
Along with
valuable.
that, in this process, is there, I know we talked about like the DRC and the Planning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals. You know, when we adopt a code, we did the IEBC recently, and we had essentially almost like a public, you know, we invited any contractors, any folks to come. In this kind of process, as we work through that, are we trying to do that and say, builders, contractors, come and tell us your thoughts kind of on these questions as well?
Mhm. I think so, yeah, that's my understanding.
And specifically, we've talked about doing a brown bag
Yes,
to elicit that.
that was another in the category of it's not happening much out there, in the development community, but to communicate, we want you to build here, and B, we want to have a public, open, honest discussion about how we can all, accomplish the same goal quickly. And I think, presenting kind of a timely topic that really has applied, say it is a shed conversation that has kind of, thrown up a couple of, pinch points in development, that repetition might indicate that should be the topic of the next brown bag lunch. So that's in the works, and some sort of regular occurrence with the community, open invitations for feedback, I think would be helpful. So
My concern about that though is if you get a room full of contractors, is it gonna muddy the water? You know, or we have to have code, you know, we have to have things that people are gonna, you know, build by. Certainly we can hear the, you know, the concerns, but you can put 10 different contractors in the room and have 10 different opinions. We can't satisfy everybody. You have to have a starting point, and then we can work out from there. So we have to set the rules. You know, we have code to go by. And then at that point, if we see a continuous issue that everybody kind of is, you know, having problems with, then yeah, we have that discussion. But I don't think we sit down and have bread bag specials about everything,
And I
so.
think the intent of that, at least when we discussed it, is to more have a framing and education as far as process, procedure, and the why. And then in doing our own analysis and review, determining, okay, where are the variances, where have been the pinch points, where have we struggled to work to yes, and it's a small stopgap. So that the case in point that Joe mentioned is you take that 200 square foot shed, and then it becomes, you know, 210 or 220, and then eventually, you know, kind of caps out over a decade or two at 280, because at that point it kicks you into a different type of code set or something along that. That's just one example of how that could evolve over time, and what the intent is with this engagement, and to also answer any questions that come up related to codes, or as we begin that dialogue for any sort of code revision or exceptions, et cetera.
Even if I may, just to be able to say, to be in a room together and find out, you know, nobody understands X comment, or there's a shared misunderstanding of X comment. How can we improve that comment and move forward without necessarily having a conversation about whether or not we should have a, you know, codex that's been adopted by the city commission in place?
yeah, very much squarely in the ounce of prevention, pound of cure category. I think a lot of gains could be made in communication with the public on what those expectations are of the city. It's a double-edged sword. Okay.
I was gonna say, I think it's a good segue actually for us to go to the second question regarding how our processes, workflow, and interpretation by staff in the interpretation and application can most closely align with the desired outcome of what the governing body and our community values, as well as our ability to of the development community's resources to actually accomplish this.
And I think Commissioner Skidmore had mentioned it on the previous question, but the working to yes is definitely also one of my priorities, and something that I would like to see happen. And not everything is a yes, very obviously, but also how can we get this to yes? So can we do this and, you know, make these changes and get these to yes? I would say that's my biggest thing, and how I would like to see the process work is just that working to yes.
And not feel that they're starting at no.
Yes,
Mhm.
correct.
Excellent point.
Well, you go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think it's been mentioned, there's maybe not a general feeling, but there's a growing feeling that you start to know, and you've got to fight that uphill battle. And hopefully we can get to the point where it's, at least you're starting in the middle, and you can work up or down from there on those types of things. I was just thinking in Lawrence, like being a part of the Lawrence Home Builders Association, there's almost an advocacy group who can take those 200 voices, filter it down, and present that. And just trying to think if, obviously that wouldn't be city sponsored, but if we could get builders here to essentially band together, create that group that then when they have issues, it's coming from that, serves almost as like an advocacy group, similar to something that's at a different scale. But to kind of work through some of those communication issues that multiple people might be having.
Kind of aggregate all this
Yeah.
stuff.
We understand that construction's not always black and white. And I think if we're in a gray area, I think we're good. We certainly don't want to make this the wild, wild west. But certainly I think if it's a gray area and we can see that it's a benefit to our community, in my mind, I think it's a go.
Thinking about, previous question, we talked about House Bill 2088 at 60 days. And to me, that's almost the umbrella that we do not pass point. What I hear from people a lot is in delays, it's money. Commissioner Crowley mentioned that they may not get paid till the job's done. These folks have loans. We all know interest rates are high. We see the market. The interest they're paying per day without an answer. I would almost like to see something and put it in the permit process that if we as a city miss our deadline, money comes out of our permit fee that they pay. So we almost have skin in the game to actually meet those deadlines. Because other than that, I think that's a little disconnect. I see that these people are frustrated that money, like they're pulling $100 bills out of their pocket every day they don't hear. And that we don't care. And if we at least have some point to be like, hey, we took 2 weeks too long, taking X amount off of your permit to kind of help compensate for that. Or something similar. I don't know if anywhere else is doing that or if
It would be new for me, but
they're just the government and they just say, here's how it is. And
yeah, I think any effort that could be made to show, to kind of put your money where your mouth is, it goes a long way for people. So we're an explorer.
What about permits from city to city? I've heard someone say they had a permit in this city, but they didn't have one here, or license to work here. And they have to go through another license application. Is that true? Is it a complex process to go through licensing to get, like Overland Park?
So from Overland Park, no, we are reciprocal with
We
Johnson
do have
County.
reciprocal.
I believe that's the only reciprocity that we have. I'm sure that if I were applying for the license, I would consider it onerous. But it is simply making sure that they meet our qualifications for the work and maybe
It's no different here than anywhere else. Quite honestly, sometimes it's even easier. You try to apply for a license in Kansas City, Missouri, it's gonna take weeks. There's a lot that you have to deal with them. But like he said, it's reciprocal with Johnson County. So Lawrence is reciprocal with Johnson County. So a lot of people utilize that license already, if you already do. And a lot of people do the Johnson County license because they offer free continuing education. So it's a win-win for contractors. But it's no more difficult here than it is in other communities.
on that, I would just say, I've been a licensed contractor here for years and I'm licensed in Johnson County. This is the first I've heard that we're reciprocal to Johnson County. So
perhaps I'm not using that term
Okay.
correctly. If you have a Johnson County license, that is that. And I apologize, I have not been processing the license.
Yeah.
But essentially, we know you meet our requirements.
Okay.
And it says that it's going to be a relatively smooth process. Whereas with other jurisdictions, I think we require more.
Okay.
And I apologize for not having that
No,
detail in front of me, but
That's
what it's meant by
It's essentially things,
residential.
that just a box to say, are you licensed in Johnson County? What is that?
in the interest of time, happy to move on, but good comments that I've logged here, I think. We alluded to EnerGov earlier. That's really kind of the source of technology. I'm less familiar with status of that, but I know a lot of the processes moved over to EnerGov. Not heard much feedback from the community or.
Well, and the community is not seeing, yet. I'd like to think that the community sees value from Energo, but they wouldn't know it because we're not online yet. And once we're online with Energo, I would expect to see,
Can you kind of expand what is Energo?
So
Because most people
yeah,
probably have
fair enough.
absolutely no idea what.
Yeah, you implemented, so you probably know more than I am, but it's run by Tyler Technologies in Texas, but it's among other things, it's municipal software that covers a lot of different buckets, but as it pertains to this conversation, it facilitates permit applications, contractor licensing, anything that would ever touch a permit. It's now digitized rather than living in a folder on your local network or in someone's inbox or something to that effect. Significant improvements in efficiency and the ability to do a lot more reporting. I believe that there's a bill on the Missouri side. I thought it was in 2088, but I reviewed it and it wasn't. But there is some motivation towards publishing monthly average turnaround times by permit type, and Energo, you hit a button to do that, and that would be a huge administrative lift for someone, and even if it's not a state requirement, huge value add to the community. As we're talking about, to hop back a couple of points, how long does it take to move a permit through? There may be one or two that slip through cracks, and a tragedy certainly, but on average, how long does it take to issue an accessory structure, a deck, a new single family, a new commercial, large commercial, whatever? So
I think right now we're seeing value in particularly in how we're able to move, not having to push documents back and forth to GBA, for example, or to David Hamby, but it's within Energo. Once we are online, contractors will, or the homeowner public will be able to apply for a permit online. They don't need to come in, they don't need to fill out a piece of paper, and also receive it back online and track the progress of their permit online, schedule inspections online. I am hopeful that folks will find out.
When do we anticipate that will be?
It has been, it has required a lot of work, and I think we're 5% away, but that last 5% has proven very challenging.
And the last kind of milestone checkpoint is we're awaiting response for some staff training from Tyler Technologies with regard to that final 5% and rolling that out for an actual implementation.
to keep us moving, the other part here is process tools, and in the bucket of in the works are a few playbooks or cookbooks of sorts for not just a general application, what steps need to happen throughout the process, but also something specific for downtown, which I know is a huge topic in conversation with the existing building code. And I think all of those comments from that conversation apply here too. If there can be clear direction given to someone before they ever even purchase a property, talk about money out of your pocket, then you're not going to all the extents of what it would take to procure a property like that, just to get to a point to know that your dream can be built. So I think if we can avoid that, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, on that, I think that's huge. I had a client this week, we looked at a building that's for sale downtown that upstairs they want to live in it, they want to have a bakery, so many awesome things for the community. But we're going to be to that point of how does that look for them? And there's a lot of folks that have that. So having something where they can do it.
Yes.
Because people's time is valuable. So they're going to have to lean on someone in the process. Real estate agent won't know. So they're going to probably have to find a it's like, how do they get to that to do those things?
Yeah.
And know kind of on that. Because, we've talked about kind of the fire suppression. How does that kind of look? And I think that's something that we in time will have a lot larger discussion on. Seeing how some other communities have done stuff. It's almost like a neighborhood revitalization in like a downtown corridor to essentially build up a community fund that has matching funds for folks that have to sprinkle. To help mitigate that burden, but kind of incentivize still doing stuff down there. So
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's not uncommon for the sprinkler to be more costs than what the value of the structure is
Mhm.
at the time of the start of the project. So it's a significant cost factor. Go ahead.
And on that, with kind of that playbook, is there an option before a permit is pulled to have a yes or a no? I know I've worked with an engineer on a project here in town.
We want to utilize a pre-application
It's
meeting.
essentially, yeah, that make or break. And by the time we go through and apply for a permit and do all of that work, if it's a no, we're rolling. If it's a yes. So like you said, is there a plan to kind of implement that in the process, or how does that come in the next few years?
I'm sure we could do a better job of communicating
And the
to
follow-up
each
from-
morning with
Yeah.
that, but,
Yeah.
we already, if somebody has a project and they want to go particularly, we're happy to facilitate that. But I think we need to do that. I'm happy to come out, talk about what's possible. We met, Joe and I, and Zach, our planner, met with folks who were, looking at buying a building downtown. So we spent 45 minutes probably talking what their questions were and what we saw as risks or studies.
Yeah, as reference to that conversation, I promise not to drag this on too long. With the existing building code, the answer often is it depends. And I think, I know that's not a well-received one. That's not beyond me at all. And so I think part of the cookbook is to at least, can we distill down down to certain forks of the road rather than, well, you need to go hire an architect and let us know. And that still may be the result of what's needed there. But at least in this particular situation we're talking about, is it a change of occupancy? How many floors? What's the new use? All of those questions, if that can be filled out ahead of time, and we can even getting to know sooner may also accomplish what you're describing of, oh, well, then I hate to scrap the idea, but at least now I know and kind of cut it.
And that's a good segue into the next question on kind of prescriptive methods and approaches
Mhm.
for resolving that.
Yes, thank you. It was alluded to a little earlier. There is, any municipality, jurisdiction needs to evaluate the risk for themselves. We alluded to it earlier about an architect or an engineer providing like a pre-approved plan. I think this is a little different. So we'll encounter this as a third party all the time. Well, this doesn't meet the minimum requirements of the code. Well, how do we fix it? And that's where we've taken the position that you need to have someone else who's not employed by the city or contracted with the city to provide a fix, because there's responsibility with what the answer to that question is. So I've cautioned away from that, but where that does, that presents further, if it's supposed to be a non-structural project, you start getting into it and there are some real significant and doing the right thing that a builder or renovator might be encountering. Going to hire a structural engineer that wasn't a part of the plan to begin with is a significant cost. So what role a city should play is, that's getting into other waters outside of what the text of the code would say. But I think it's another question in the spirit of what's right for your community. That does allow for some short circuits, but there are some other elements of providing those answers that need to be considered as well too. So.
Just something to think about. We'll come back to it.
Yeah. If I'm counting right, this is number 6 here. Stakeholder feedback. How do we lower the barrier of entry to development? And this is a good kind of summary question that's touching on all that we've talked about along the way. We've collected some to-dos here, but I think in the spirit of if you want to put a proverbial banner on the front of City Hall, please build here. How is that best communicated to the public, in your opinion?
I think being a contractor, and as Commissioner Crowley mentioned, it's the people who are doing it. We get a group coming from out of town, does a subdivision here, does whatever. They have a bad experience. They communicate to their peers. I mean, I think we all have to understand in every aspect of the world that you communicate with your peers, good and bad. That does not mean give the farm away. And as Mayor Allen had mentioned, it's not always yes. But just being mindful kind of in those things that, rising tide raises all boats.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we work with all of those folks and probably more particularly in the no's to bad answers. You know, if you tell someone, people really probably don't care what the reasoning is, you said yes, they're good to go. When we're saying no, how do we concisely inform them that here is why, here is what happened, here's avenues. And, you know, it does kind of touch back to the previous question, but it's on a lot larger scale. You know, how do we make those people feel like, hey, Ottawa's a great place to go work. Like, we want to do a subdivision there because the process was this. It was awesome. And we saw great financial return compared to kind of other locations. That's something I think within that world.
Yeah, word of mouth advertising is what I'm hearing. That's a great point.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think most things that I've heard, either positive or negative, are from the people doing it. So I think that's the way that the word gets around most.
Great, that takes me to the end of my questions. It's been really helpful. I will make it a point to be pretty purposeful in getting back to some of the concrete to-dos here. I think there is some low-hanging fruit, as we've described, and happy to be part of it and thankful for the opportunity to have a conversation.
That's one of all these questions here, and we got two builders here, so I appreciate your input on that. But might other builders in town want to answer these questions? We put this on our website, invite the builders. Here are some things we're looking at. What is your opinion? We got a builder, successful builder right behind me here. Maybe he'd like to answer some of these questions on his input on these things as well.
I was gonna ask, I think, once we because we've already started the process on refining some of our improvements. And I think we would also like to kind of begin the engagement, how and why we're doing certain things. And once that dialogue's going, I hope then that it can become a rolling. And then also, as you will read in there, and part of why we want to really rely on InterGov is its ability to provide the data for tracking and analysis that will help us also be able to assess what is successful. And we're kind of in a bit of a chicken or egg kind of, because we do want that input, but we also know that we have a finite amount of time and staff. So we want to kind of build a solid foundation, and then from there, look at focusing on quality fixtures to stick with the building theme. And I think that as we start down this path and also begin an education campaign, both on the staff level, but also with who we're serving on a day-to-day basis, which is, you know, the homeowner who comes in wants to know, I want to expand a garage, or I want to build a garage, what do I need to do? Or our, you know, our building professionals who are essentially leaving a mark on the community for generations with what is constructed or what is rehabilitated with the downtown.
And just to conclude my comments, as I've been to third world countries, and I've seen stories of buildings collapsing and electrical fires and all these things that we don't want. So yeah, we just can't completely just do away with it. Gotta have this buildings and things. So, yeah, so it's gotta be that fine balance. I don't know where it is. Talk about that gray area. You know, same way as making loans, you know, there's always that gray area. What do? You kind of go with your gut sometimes. You get all the information you possibly can, and you're in that gray area. And sometimes you say yes, sometimes it's no. But I always thought was to try to get to yes somehow, some way. Yeah, so that's for the time.
Well, and the only thing I would add, and kind of what you alluded to, is if, you know, a builder in town or developer has any thoughts, they're always welcome to email any of us, I'm sure, and we would be happy to pass it along. So, and we're accessible if you don't see us down about, our email addresses are online. So we'd always, I'm sure, pass those messages along on your thoughts to these questions.
While we have you, Joe, kind of touch separate outside of this, and anecdotally, of course, Commissioner Crowley mentioned that we need 300 plus houses by 2030 for a housing study we have. Are you seeing municipalities essentially municipalities do the dirt work. They do the infrastructure of the roads, they build the development and sell lots to offset the cost. Because I know we're running into an issue where infill lots are not, they may be open, but they're not for sale. So they're not open for all intents and purposes. And it's kind of that barrier to entry where if you're a builder, even at a certain scale, going to a developer is a big leap. And I know there are other cities that, do that. Are you seeing that where cities are basically putting in infrastructure and then there's a subdivision that they're selling those lots to builders from there?
My personal anecdote, I don't have enough experience with, until we get a building permit application as defined by my role at GBA, but we do have some other folks that I think if I can get back to you on that. They act as city engineer, much like David Hamby does, but, in both Kansas City and St. Louis Pros. And I think there have been some creative approaches to that. Let me do a little digging and see if I can get back to you. I think it's a really great question, especially because the costs, that level of cost, is associated with a large amount of risk as opposed to building out one lot at a time. Yeah. So, is there any way in which the city could leverage its, the size of what the city can, the way that it can throw around? That's a good project.
Go ahead.
And for years, I always said that the city is not a developer. It's not our job to do it. But then recently I've thought about that because of the hundreds and hundreds of houses that have been built here in the last 5 or 6 years, the majority of it's by local builders. We don't have developers coming to town. And you're right, that's a big risk for them to stick their neck out, especially in today's time, for them to do that. Now, we also, in certain situations, the city does give a lot of money back in our HID and things like that. That money wouldn't actually be going back to a developer. It would be money that we would be recapturing, I guess, that build out with, because we're not giving it back to a developer in a sense. So I certainly a thought I've had too. So I'd love to hear your comments if you do find any.
I know folks in DC, when we were talking to people there, there's even cities here in Kansas, some of them are smaller and they're looking at, they have to do it because they're kind of, they're either going to die potentially in the next decade or they've got to do it as the city. And so we're not in that position, thankfully, but kind of like creative plans for future. What would that?
Love that creative approach.
Joe, one other thing, and I don't know how often you come to Ottawa, whether, to deal with, our department or have meetings with staff and stuff. We have a great inspector here. He's been with us a couple years now. He's still learning. It wasn't his role before. This is his first time, but he's learning. I would really appreciate it when you're here, that if you could go out with him on job sites, to walk him through some of those things. He may have questions that it's easier to explain on the site than it is, via text message or email or whatever else. And I don't mean I mean just any and every time you're here. If you could plan on having an extra 30, 45 minutes to go out with Chris and have those conversations, I would greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely.
He's doing a great job. I hear a lot of good things about him. It's just, sometimes you plateau because you don't have any more, to pull from, information wise to pull from. And you're a great source. So if he could utilize you, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd be an honor to do that. Chris does call and text, and I appreciate every chance to interact with him. I'm glad you mentioned it because that has been in the bucket of some to-dos for regularity right along with him. I do that in one of the jurisdictions here in Kansas City where I function at. I did one yesterday, first time repping for a city in Northeast Johnson County, and we got to spend some time and actually look at how they missed a few nail holes in the joist. That level of detail.
Sure.
Goes a long way because then that'll be reflex stuff for Chris and for any inspector out there.
I would appreciate that.
Well said, and I will do that. I didn't know anyone else was just interested in spending that amount of time talking about buildings and development, and maybe you weren't.
We might have more.
That's
We might
great.
have more
It's been an honor. Thank you for having this discussion.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Director Neese.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
We'll move on to item 11B.
2026 to 2030 capital improvement program review.
Director Landis will present the 2026 to 2030 capital improvement program.
So because everything that you really need to look at is on the screen, I might just move myself to the side. if that's okay. Um. So the capital improvement program is part of our annual budget process, and it is in the last couple of years, the first thing we've looked at, because these are the large projects that if we are moving ahead with them, they are the first thing that we need to focus on budgeting for, as well as all of the line item details that go along with it. This is the first time that we've really talked about budget this year, and we are working towards our 2026 operating budget, but this is a 5-year capital improvement program. So our very first conversation this year is today, and then this is the remaining calendar for the budget process. And so we've designed it in that there's a couple of Monday work study sessions where we can sit down and talk about utilities specifically, and then we'll be back to normal regular meetings to continue our conversations about all the detailed funds that are included in the budget process. All the way up to the adoption of budget, public hearing, all of that being held on September 3rd. So it feels like a very lengthy process, but in reality, we're doing all of our prep work right now, and we'll be starting the process in June, and really we're wrapped up by the middle of July, because based on state law now, you have to identify to the county what your intention is by July 20th, as to whether or not you'll exceed R&R and what your intended mill rate will be. And so there is a time lapse between then and the end of the process, but we really are right in the meat of it right now. The CIP is, as I said, a 5-year plan. It is important because that we all understand that a lot of these projects are moving targets. Some of them being designed has not been yet completed, so we don't know what the actual cost will be. Some of them are in the program, some of them are on our future project listing as a result of not knowing where we might land with the total cost. The fact that it's in the capital improvement program does not tie you to the cost. It doesn't tie you to moving ahead. It doesn't necessarily mean that the funding source will be available by the time we get to it down the road. A lot of times we most importantly focus on 2026 because that has to be in our budget process and our expected funding needs for 2026. And the rest of it is really more narrow scoped. What's in the capital improvement program being those items that we are highly focused on at this time. There is an extensive list, 3 or 4 pages long, of future projects. It's probably not all encompassing. I did list some in here. They are in your packet. Everything that we're talking about today was in your packet, in the draft capital improvement program. And because we've identified a funding source does not mean that that may be the funding source that's been identified, especially along the lines of grants right now and the status of federal funding availability. A lot of times we're just now hoping that it'll still be available when we get around to applying for it, or that that once we've applied for it, that it'll actually come to fruition. The process itself is that it will go after you. It will go on to the planning commission. They review it, not from the perspective of should it be a project that we do, but more is it in line with the city's comprehensive plan? And then they will hold a public hearing to ask any input against those projects. Also, is it in conformance with the comprehensive plan? And then it will come back to you on that last budget hearing date. There'll be an item of approval then. There are a lot of project categories. They basically hit every function that we have across the city. You'll see those as we move through. At the front of the document, we did move to a more online version for our input to the program in creating this. So it does give you a graph breakdown of where the funding sources are coming from. But keep in mind that this chart is really, while it might say it looks like long-term debt is the biggest portion of that, that does not mean that property taxes are the source of that long-term debt. It's a variety of funding sources. And so it might feel a little misleading when you look at the large portion on that graph. This is just a visual of the funding sources themselves. Notice that along the left side, there are a lot of grant items listed there. There are different types of grants. Some our FAA, some of them federal, some KDOT transportation funding, as well as different utility funds and, other budgeted funds. In the interest of this potentially being a long meeting, I am thinking that if you're okay with it, we touch on the project. I can pause and you can ask questions if you have questions. Many of them you have seen before. They were in the existing current 5-year plan. Not much has changed on some of the projects, and I'll just note that for you. If that's okay with you, then just jump in if you have a question. Otherwise, I'll just try to keep moving in the interest of time. Reconstruction of the taxiway at the airport. You've heard about this even recently. City Manager Selcott brought to you an update on this and some funding. This is structured in a way that in 2024, we did the design. That was a partial funding by grants, and we are expecting to be able to do phase 1 with grant opportunities. Recently, you heard that phase 2 and 3 were kind of on the cusp of not knowing whether or not the grant funding was available. Currently, it's not available. We'll move ahead with phase 1. I'm hoping that phases 2 and 3 will be grant funded over time. In the auditorium, we have a couple of projects that are that will help our visual, but also help our patrons and our people that we rent our facility to. This is a basement accessibility lift, and actually it's been on our list of things that we wanted to do for quite some time. This is to help the mobility impaired access the basement for rentals, for events, for anything that's going to be hosted down there. Currently, there is no ADA accessibility to the basement other than an outside ramp, which is fairly steep and difficult to maneuver, especially in any weather conditions. The lower lobby restrooms updated. Currently, they are an older restroom downstairs, and the idea being that eventually, you'll see on the future funding or future project list, is that we would love to renovate the entire basement, but this is a small portion of that renovation, which needs to happen not just for accessibility issues, but also because it's fairly aged and those amenities need to be replaced. The community kitchen remodel is incredibly exciting. They have a great opportunity to obtain a grant that can be for a portion of the kitchen remodel, and they have some really grand ideas on how this can then be used for enabling all kinds of food programs and education, and partnering with other companies and or individuals to be able to use that, what will be eventually a commercial kitchen space. The grant right now is for $50,000. That is not the entire remodel, but it would at least get us a portion of the way down the road, and hope that that could be a phased-in project after that first initial funding. Under building maintenance, this is a project that you've heard of and that currently are receiving updates on. This was not in the previous CIP and should have been. It's really just been added for the purpose of making sure that everybody knows that it was a project that was planned. It was funded under a 2022A GO bonds. We are in the process of getting that project moving now and determining what that timeline might look like. So it's just been added to the document, but is definitely not a new project for you. The commission room modernization, you heard earlier that it is underway, and the reason why we're also in this room. And so it was not previously in the CIP. It's been added just to ensure that the projects are in there that are currently underway, included as a 2025 revised project. And you'll see in that document, there is a 25 column. That's mostly what was in your CIP. Some of those items have been revised slightly. This project was funded or is currently being funded by the ARPA grants that we received. And it does indicate that capital improvement fund, but a portion of the dollars that were allocated before the end of the year, but available under ARPA funding, was moved over to be an earmark to be able to finish out the project when it's completed. There's a lot of rules that go along with the ARPA funding and having those spent by the end of 2024. So in order to accommodate the project and work within the rules that were provided to us, this is how we're moving ahead with funding that project. In our electric utility, I would say all of the projects that are in here are focused on reliability and sustainability. The 15th and Main traffic replacement, this is a project that you heard about last year. It is in the current CIP. It did change slightly in the cost. Part of that related to the design that has to occur. It will occur this year. Both the design and the construction is estimated to be completed yet this year. If the difference in cost was from 575 to 630,000, that will still be paid for from the electric utility fund. This is one of many traffic light replacements that need to occur. This is the first one that was brought to you as one of the busiest intersections that had improvements that were needed. And then the second is on the list of replacements as well, and this has been placed for a couple of years beyond now. Once we get the first light in, we'll have a much better idea of what that cost could look like for the same type of intersection. And so this cost may even change by the time we get around to the next year's CIP program.
Dr. Langus, on both of those, is it just the ADA compliant signals? Is there any concrete work going in on either of these kind of to improve that as well with the signal? Or is it just really like poles, lights, and system?
I believe it's
Because I saw the
crosswalks
crosswalks, so is that
turn lanes,
pavement? Okay,
all of it.
Quasi geometric,
okay,
so you'll have new conduit.
everything, okay.
I'm so glad they're here to answer questions about the projects. I really am. The Northeast Substation reliability and capacity improvements. This is a project that was also in the current CIP. This is design only. We don't know exactly what the actual construction cost is going to be. So you will see the construction portion of that being added back to the CIP in the future once that design is completed. The river crossing for circuits 8 and 10 is also a project that's in the current CIP where the design would take place this year in 2025 with construction in 2026. Also, that construction amount may change depending on the design, but right now we're planning for a number similar to what's there, and that would be long-term financed to be paid back by the electric utility. System conversion, this is to convert a 50-year-old portion of the city of the 2400 kV circuit to 7200 kV. We have talked about this in the past. It is a large project, and the design would take place this year. It is only in a portion of the city. So in the map, which I know is a smaller map, but the red portion itself is really where the focus would be for the replacement of those circuits and lines. And this, there is a portion of the city that has already been tackled, I believe, in previous years. And so this is a continuation of that replacement program.
Is this, looking at the map, is this part of circuits 8 and 10? Just kind of looking where it crosses, are they? You're downtown. Okay, I was just, it looked north of the river too, so that's why I wasn't sure.
It is a large project, and so of course, long-term financing will have to be used and paid back by the electric utility over time. The golf course, these are two projects that we've talked about with you previously, the first being the irrigation system and the need to.
Currently inoperable.
Currently inoperable,
Irrigation
it's
system.
operating partially functioning irrigation system. So this does include both the design for how that irrigation layout might look like, and that is what we're hoping to tackle in 2026 with funds from our capital improvement fund, and then proposed long-term financing for the actual placement of the irrigation system on the course. That would of course include centralized controls, which it does not have now. It's manual operation, as well as a fully operating irrigation system.
And is this with our staff doing it, or is this going out for bid, getting someone to come in and do the whole system?
I believe we'll be doing.
And we may look at doing a bid submittal in-house as well, but at this point, we wanted to proceed with a realistically prudent but liberal approach, and because it's better to come in under rather than say we want to do it in-house and then for whatever reason, we misestimated or we don't have the time because of the price.
You definitely wanna.
This also includes the need to replace the pump, as the well, in addition to the pump, in order to even access the irrigation system, whether it's current or new.
Yeah, so the control you see there is actually, at one point, the system. They ripped all that out. Especially a manual valve with each screen, you have to open valve and pump on.
And you can't water the entire course. You
No.
can only do some tee boxes and the greens. That was the basis of my, we really don't have a functional irrigation system.
Really.
Can you touch on that too? You said you have to go turn it on and then kick the pump on. So the pump doesn't automatically kick on, water's not flowing.
Yes, I always pressure that. So, and that's, she feels like. It does have a VFD, so it's up slower, but you're still hammering over the big spots. It's not something efficient where you can, say you're springing a private minute to get a fire, and it's really time consuming to. Irrigation system where you can set your schedule where I'm in May and just. Skip.
The additionally, part of the concern, this really only, tackles the irrigation system itself concern, but the idea that there's not nearly enough water in that pond available all season long to be able to walk those streams, and fairways and the entire course. So we're still working on that. That's not something that's even there. Here, what we could do there.
I have had lots of people tell me that the course is looking a lot better, that there's actually, fairways that they can hit and mark on their card that they, for that fairway hit and everything. So kudos to you and your team, the few months that you guys have been there, and it's looking a lot better already.
Slowly
Yeah.
getting.
Doing good.
I saw stripes.
Currently, that is a team of two, so they are working their tails off out there and they're doing a great job.
Director Lance, on this, oh, sorry, on that, do we have concern, you had mentioned that the pond sometimes doesn't have water. With looking at this for potentially, in the next year and a half, 18 months. What the cost will be to address getting water to the point it can even flow into the system kind of first, or kind of what that might look like from a cost perspective too. Is it apples, do you get the cart before the horse, or do you get the system in place and then focus on getting water to it?
Sure. So we did have our city engineer come out. We talked about what does the pond look like and the improvements that might need to happen there. There's some dam, we need to probably do a study of the dam and what those improvements could look like to be able to retain more water. We were stopped short of our investigation moves early in the year. Of course, as soon as we really started to get in, start to dig out the pond as best we could with our city crews, we were kind of stopped by the temperatures and the snow. But this really addresses the need to have that design for the irrigation system itself in 2026. The need for the irrigation system does not go away regardless of how you get water to it. The other part of the project, it is difficult to come up with a cost estimate on that. So that is on our list of things to try to make sure that we can determine how we can best keep the water that's coming in. We've driven by recently when it rains. I don't love to see it flowing right out at the end of the pond into the system, but we'd like to be able to retain more of that water. The other opportunities there for watering, we just need to explore.
Does it flip to municipal water if the water levels are
It is not ground.
too low? Okay.
And that pond is only. Vault that sets in, so I'm sorry, the shallow end of the pond, and there's kind of a vault that the intake sets in. There's only probably
Very
really
limited.
isn't the number of
Foot acreage.
water.
Not to add work to your guys' list of all this stuff, but I'd love to see something. I know I've mentioned to Director Sneeden before, looking at gray water potentially. You know, we have water that we put back into the river once it's been cleaned, when it goes through the wastewater plant. Is there an option to potentially use some of that?
We've discussed that actually, and we've also discussed within the municipal system, we know we have circulation and excess byproducts so that we can take beneficial reuse of water that would otherwise be discarded and apply it to the corpse is one of our approaches to do so.
Because grass thankfully doesn't need potable water, so more options there. But just some thoughts on that as we're looking for sources of water, what that may look like long term.
The golf course cart path installation, we've talked about the need for sections of the cart path, really the entire cart path needs replaced. The number that's here is an old estimate. We didn't have a really good estimate until recently, and even then, we have some options that we've been discussing whether or not city crews could do a portion of the work. Also then whether or not that would be concrete or asphalt, what those cart paths might look like. Currently, there are sections of the cart path that cause us to not be able to, even on rainy days, not be able to access the cart path at all because they lie in water, or they're non-existent altogether. And so we've also been talking about phased approaches to this. The reason why it's in the CIP right now is not because we've identified a funding source, but that we intend to go look for grants that might help to fund this project or portions of the project. And a lot of times in order to have those grant applications, you want to see that in your current capital improvement program. Under our parks, we talked with you last year about including the aquatic center project in our CIP. And we did 2 years ago talk about the need to set aside some money for the planning of that swimming pool replacement facility, whether that's an aquatics, what that aquatic center might look like, or facility might look like. The way that this is structured here is that we did set aside those about approximately $62,000 in the capital improvement fund a couple of years ago, and that was intended to be able to do a study to look for a location, to collect some public impact feedback as far as what those amenities might look like, to do the true planning portion of the project. And then we have allotted some dollar figures here for design and actual construction. But the reality is, until that's a phased approach to accomplishing an aquatic center, and we need to tackle step one first before we can move on to the rest. And so it is in here. It is a 50-year-old swimming pool. It does have annual repairs, some extensive, that have been done to the facility itself. So it's in here as a show to make sure that the community knows that it has been on the list. We are still looking into it. The long-term funding source has not yet fully been identified, and that.
It's a strategic priority.
Thank you. Perfect words.
Along with that, just as it came out today, so you probably haven't even seen it. I saw that Commerce released its Blueprints to Build grant for up to $2.5 million for community centers. So just kind of a bug to maybe check that out and see if we do the pool and maybe even expand our aquatic center to more of a community center, aquatic center, if there's a potential for some significant.
Fantastic.
Did you already see that today? Oh,
I can't.
okay. I just saw
sure
Commerce
to
just put that out, and just if funds like that are available in the coming years, some opportunities might be.
Yeah, fantastic. For our public safety, we've got range improvement plan. This is here with the intention that we go out to look for grants for those range improvements. The range itself is aged and has some areas that really need some upkeep and replacement of pieces that while they do an excellent job maintaining the range now as best they can, there are some things that actually need to be replaced. So it is in the CIP so that it can be used as a show of intent for those improvements that can be used in a grant application. Sidewalks are a topic of interest across the entire community. As you know, sidewalks are difficult. Replacing one block of sidewalk in a residential area is one of the things that is fairly easy to look at, determine what the cost and but putting together an entire sidewalk program is something that maybe doesn't necessarily exist right this one second. There has been a lot of discussion about some of the major sidewalks, or in the placement of sidewalks along major sections of town, not just one block at a time, but maybe, all the way from Maine to a particular area and those are, projects that need to be designed. There are difficulties with some of those in areas where the streets are smaller, the front yards are shorter, and there has to be a lot more work put into it. The sidewalks that are in this plan are ones that have been, this one in particular has been identified in the past. This one is related to the sidewalk that could circle around what you would call the Price Chopper section. It is currently in a TIF district. There are dollars in that TIF district, and we have had conversations even up to 5 years ago where we wanted to place some sort of path to be able to move from the Price Chopper sidewalk where it ends there and continue south towards the rest of the business district there. And so this is an opportunity finally to be able to explore that option. So the design would be in 26 with the idea that we would construct in 27 or thereafter. Because it's in a TIF district, it does require a project designation within that TIF district. So there is some work that needs to be done, and we'll know the exact amount once we get to the design phase being completed.
So while you're on sidewalks, just a couple of questions. There were several programs from last year that are no longer on here. One of those is the 11th Street from Ash to Main. And I know the list of the TA awards came out, that they awarded $31 million. Did we hear back on potential funding on grants for that, or what that may be? Because I saw that some of these safe routes to school things aren't even on that.
We had to shift the 11th Street priority to a longer term horizon. And that gets back to, as Director Landis had started off the conversation, which is essentially the only thing more difficult than repairing and replacing existing sidewalks is trying to construct new sidewalks in existing, particularly inconsistent right of way and restricted public easements. So the available space will require significant property owner interaction in order to acquire the space necessary to construct the sidewalk. And so at this time, we pushed it back because we didn't have a realistic funding source that we could put out with respect to how we would actually go about implementing it, because it could be that if we had to physically acquire the right of way, which there are terms and conditions with respect to some of the funding, that would be more expensive possibly than even just constructing the sidewalk itself.
I mean, I know for me, I think sidewalks are an important issue we've talked about, and I guess I wish I would see some near schools. The fact that any sidewalk near school, Willow is the one here, has fallen off. Potentially is a little concerning to me that, you know, if we're kicking the can past 2030 at this point, you know, what do those kind of look like? So from my perspective, I would like to see, maybe that's spending some money on traffic studies and foot pattern studies and something that may find routes around the schools that would be beneficial. I know with this rain, I don't know how many people drive down Willow around school time. There are so many kids. And I think we need to have that discussion on figuring out what that might look like to really look at where we need sidewalks and how to go about that. So we should keep that on. Yeah.
I've been working with our city engineer, and he is going to put together a preliminary engineering report for us for the 11th from Maine to Ash. We just took it out of the CIP currently because there are, he's going to provide reporting this year. So moving forward from there, if it at that point determined that it was feasible, we would be able to put it back into the CIP, and then we have to once that came through, he'd be able to lead us down the direction this is what it's gonna cost for design, and then with design. Go get it's actually.
Okay.
It's, because you don't see it on the CIP, doesn't, it's not being, it's just not listed here because it's still.
Okay.
I guess the CIP is a fluid document. We'll talk about that.
And it is listed, it's just been put onto a longer term horizon until we're able to clarify.
And it could be brought sooner.
And it is a complicated study because of the right of way and easement restrictions that we have. In fact, even we go from kind of a standard for the period urban road design that then where it jogs, it's constricted to what would be more of a one lane road with parking, but it's actually 2 lanes. And then after that 1 block segment, it widens out. And unfortunately, with that constricted area there, you're not too far from the front porch. But we acknowledge, and as DJ had indicated, Director Wells, that is a prime location. It brings folks into the north side of the school campus from Kansas Park. And so we acknowledge that that would be the ideal location for it. We have good sidewalk to the south that brings you in there along the rec center. However, the next sidewalk is significantly north of there, and we know kids are gonna, like water, take the path of least resistance. And so that's where it would be ideally suited and situated, and so we do want to pursue that. It's just unfortunately taking, when we rolled up our sleeves and really studied it so we could get concrete numbers, we were all shocked and disappointed at what we found.
That's fair.
Sorry,
No, you're good. And then 2 small other ones. Main Street ADA, was that moved to annual budget? I know we had 10K planned a year to kind of like hit block by block to get ADA parking downtown.
It rolled into the street annual operating budget.
Okay, and-
because yes,
And
so
same thing with-
it was taken out of the CIP, but it is the annual operating budget.
And is that the same, I know we took out, I think annual street paving moved, and then the sidewalk repair replace program. Are those programs
Yeah.
still in existence?
They are,
Not in CIP?
yes, because the street maintenance program is a maintenance program. The street plan overall will contain some large street reconstruction projects, and there are a couple in the CIP currently that have our attention, and we might have a little more information on those than we do some of the others right now. But same way with the sidewalks and the ADA parking and those are just because they were smaller and more maintenance type projects that we should be,
Doing every year,
doing
yeah.
anyway. Yes, they came out of the actual capital improvement plan.
Thank you.
Yes.
and we are looking to build upon and refer to that Connecting Ottawa transportation plan that was completed way back in 2014, where they did identify that and actually had, I think, addressed a significant number of the deficiencies that were identified at that time. And I think most, if not all of those were identified. And so now we are looking to tweak that to augment that study that was specifically mentioned.
And I think just one more comment there is, Commissioner Skidmore alluded to it, that just because it's not in the CIP doesn't mean it can't happen. And just because it's in the CIP doesn't mean it will happen immediately, but it is a fluid process overall. And this is just as a document that the public can use to see what the indications are. So those things that are, absolutely on the immediate radar. And again, as Director Welsh mentioned, there are lots of things on our radar that we're currently working on, but they weren't ready to be placed in the document quite yet. They're not ready for movement quite yet. But that doesn't mean they can't be brought to you before even the next CIP process. So we could still have things that come up later this year. If there's a grant opportunity that comes open, that a funding source opened itself that we didn't know about, all of those projects. You saw it a couple of years ago with the base grant. Those projects that we accomplished with the base grant weren't necessarily those that we were working on right that 1 second, but they were an opportunity to be able to use that grant funding opportunity, because it presented itself then. Under our special street section, this one is the reconstruction of Cedar Street from 9th to 13th. This is very similar. We did a 2-block stretch 2 years ago, I believe, this is the design portion of that project because we are unsure of what the construction might actually look like and what the split might be between the work needed for street reconstruction as opposed to stormwater. And so once the design is taken care of, then we'll be able to move ahead with the construction. So we've indicated there what that phase 1, 2, and 3 might be for that 4-block stretch. This is the reconstruction of Main Street from the Main and 23rd intersection south towards I-35. This is where you have, where you see that center median crumbling, and there's some intersection improvements that need to be made. And then to the south. So what we've indicated here is that a portion of this would be paid from our special streets fund, and that we would be seeking KDOT participation in those improvements because of this location. Under our stormwater improvements, this is the past study and the planning assistance to states program in which we've been working with over the past year, and city manager Selcott has done an extensive amount of work.
And Director Walsh.
And Director Walsh.
Since he's come on board. It's
Sure.
been massive assistance with that, so thank you.
Yes, thank you. That they are working with them to directly have the study done that would tell us how we can make improvements to the levee. And then beyond that, once the levee can absorb what's being sent to it, then we can start tackling some of the other stormwater issues across town. But this would indicate that could potentially be a 50-50 grant, but there is some additional, but there's a maximum amount that they would be able to pay towards the project. So this indicates that the stormwater fund would also contribute to that grant.
So in essence, we're looking at 50,000 a year. Is that-
No, it would be look at.
Oh,
No,
150,
it's
well, we
200,000.
would pay more. This was the one that we had the 100% funding for, that now with how the apportionment is, we have to be contributing, and to be competitive for our application, we need to be contributing more than we're drawing. And so that's why we structured it this way.
It's a $700,000 study,
Phase 1, phase 2.
Our out of pocket would be.
400,000.
400,000.
Okay, and does the Corps help out of this in any way? It's kind of their,
That's the 150
that's from them.
each year.
I'm just trying to understand the necessity for this. See that huge price tag and things.
We have the original pumps, the original electric, our tow drains, we know have never functioned properly, which is common for the design of the time. And our design mirrors the Fairfax levee or Fairfax Drainage District, which is in North Kansas City and splits both Kansas and Missouri. So there's some on the Johnson County Wyandotte, and then over into Jackson County on the Missouri side. And it's an identical design. It's obviously much more extensive, but it's just ours is a little microcosm of that, and they receive significant both design and construction assistance from the federal government. And we're hopeful that in working with Representative David's and Senator Moran's office, as well as some tacit support from Senator Marshall's office, we might be competitive once it comes time to actually putting this to work, because that's part of the issue is we have stormwater projects here that we know we need to do in town. And we have on both the north and the south side, single points of failure. And so we would be increasing both the volume and the velocity at which that volume is arriving to a point that we already know can be inundated.
Now, this is just the engineering cost for talking about that, right?
This is the study.
Study. And so the cost to repair is gonna be.
Significantly more. And that's why we're hopeful that at some point in the next 20 years, we'll be able to get it.
And that, even though it's core property, that is if there's a major deficiency,
It's our responsibility, and the
responsibility.
Corps there to assist us.
I find that weird because when we tried to replace some, whatever the pipe was through the levee, the Corps would not let us do it essentially, right? That's why it went over the levee.
Because we would need to do all kinds of geotechnical for the soil and the embankment. And then that would require, because you have what's called, under seepage, which essentially is exactly like, it sounds like it's that the ground becomes a sponge. And so as such, when we start punching the holes through in an area that, even if it's engineered correctly, but it's the wrong type of soil type or the adjacent, it causes catastrophic failures. And so that's why they're really apprehensive when you start trying to go horizontal through there. But a lot of that, with what we're looking to try and correct, would, I think would mitigate a lot of that. And when we start getting into this, I can make sure that we put just a simple schematic, not to nerd out on infrastructure, but as far as like how a levee is, kind of what a cross section of it looks like and what a tow drain is, so that the terms that we use, you and the public can visualize what that reference is.
And where some of the water comes from.
Yes.
I think a lot of people just think it comes from Pomona Lake, and some of that water comes from the houses off 17th Street.
The issue, yeah,
So,
most
I
of the
mean-
issue, the levees aren't just as Commissioner Crowley says, it's not just to keep the Maridazine out. It's, we have to get the water because of how the flow design is from the city that flows to the lowest point, and then we have to get it pumped up and into the Maridazine. So that's where we have our problems is, so if we have a pump failure, then we're not able to evacuate the water, and that's where we end up with a situation where we get so much rain that it overwhelms the pumps. And you get the 2019, or we get a pump failure, which gives you something similar to 2019. Because you're still not able to evacuate the water.
I was gonna say one more time, ouch.
Well, and especially if we start to reduce permeable ground by putting in 344 more houses.
Yeah.
A lot more water is headed this direction.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's no such thing as a free lunch, so, there's a time and place for open ditch drainage because that reduces the surface runoff, but then there's a downside in that you also see the potential to lessen your road life, because it's a lot easier for, again, that kind of under seepage and infill to eat away and degrade the base. So, the Newton's third law.
Yep.
For every action, there's gonna be an equal and opposite reaction.
And I mean, I think we all know, you see around the country water winds. So it's a big number, but if the levy ever were to not hold, we're paying insurance essentially, I would think, to find out information to avoid a potential catastrophe. I don't remember the 51.
I wasn't here.
All right, for the water projects, you have seen these all before. I believe all of them were listed in our previous CIP. But these are really considered maintenance. They are main replacements for the water system, but we wanted to make sure that they were brought to your attention and to the public's attention, that there are mains being replaced. These are the major ones. There are other main sections being replaced annually anyway, just these are the ones that we brought to your attention. So 15th to 17th Street on Main for 2025, 19th and Elm to Twyman in 2026, Cedar Street from 1st to 4th Street in 2027, Cedar Street from 4th to 7th in 2028. There you go, and Davis Road in 2029. In our wastewater program, we have the PLC and SCADA upgrades, and because you've asked last time, I know what that means because they put it in the description. So the programmable logic controllers are the PLCs, and the supervisory control and data acquisition SCADA system is what needs to be replaced here. These are both more than 20 years old, and this is maintenance for, or required replacement and maintenance for our systems. The replacement of the Pin-Up pump station, you did approve this to be replaced, and it was ordered in late 2024. You've been receiving regular updates on this, so this is just the update for that to be in the 2025 CIP. This is where we've listed some of our future capital improvements. This is not an all-inclusive list, and I don't intend to read through every one of these, but there are airport projects here, the renovation of the auditorium basement, design and construction of a new fire station, some demolition and reconstruction of the clubhouse at the golf course, a variety of parks that need attention, and some of the sidewalks that have been talked about in the past,
Including 11th Street from Main to Ash.
including 11th Street that's been discussed, as well as some of the street construction projects that have been discussed, and I would assume that there are even more. It's a big list. And so as we have future conversations about the street plan, you'll see more than just what's listed here, as well as some of those stormwater utility improvements that need to be done after we get past the study and the improvements to the levee itself. And then there are a variety of water, wastewater, and electric utility improvements that are not just ongoing maintenance, but some of them very large reconstruction projects. For example, in the wastewater utility, we had placed in 2030 the interceptor upgrades for the West Side Interceptor. And by placing that alone, that $8.2 million, by long-term financing that becomes a much larger project and would drain that fund balance immediately. And so there has to be more conversation about how do we get these really large infrastructure improvement projects done with the existing utilities that we have because of our smaller customer base, which limits some of our fund balances in those utilities. There's the list of some of the electric utility projects as well. In this process itself was an important piece that we do go out and ask for the public to send in their forms with some ideas of projects that we should be paying attention to. We received 3 actual forms. We received lots of comments on social media, but Deanna Lee provided 2 of them, both the swimming pool replacement, noting that the pool is outdated and less competitive in attracting visitors, and then also the Orlis Cox updates, and including that the current facilities have deteriorated over time, leading to safety concerns, functionality limitations, and aesthetic decline. And I mentioned their comments because all 3 of these submissions went to great length to make sure that you had some information on why they felt that those improvements were necessary. Even if they don't know exactly where the funding could come from, they at least took the time to outline what type of improvement they felt was necessary for those areas. The ones that are listed on the right are some of the social media comments on that post and just some conversations that have happened since then. I thought it was important to put them here because they're probably all the same types of projects that you hear about and are probably already also thinking about that need attention as well. And many of them are things that we've already talked about today.
Director Lemus, could you, while, we have on here the pool and we've talked about aquatic center, Orlis Cox is on here twice. You were potentially, someone allude to kind of the fact that by statute in Kansas, the ORC cannot own property. So we own the property, it's operated. Could you kind of just touch base kind of on how that works for Orlis Cox?
Well, you did a great job right there. So we do own the property for that part, and they do operate they do all of the programming for that. They also do some of the improvements to the area itself. And I don't have a most recent listing of what those improvements might be. So it really is a partnership, and there are improvements that probably do need to be made at that facility, and we need to get back to working together to assess what those would be.
They do get it.
Well, Yeah, and to clarify that, that's not through the city.
That's who the school, largest.
That's who the school
Yeah,
is.
largest.
That's by statute. It's like, much like our library mill levy is.
It is separated on.
One point of clarification, they can own property, the way they can take title property.
Is by the
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
But so you said they do contribute to some of their money.
I believe a couple of years ago, you received a report from the Recreation Commission where they indicated that they had, how, much they had put into the facilities over time. I don't recall exactly what that number was. We did not at the time provide a list back to you of the, improvements and the money that we also use to maintain that facility as well. I think it's worth looking into at some future point to determine what really needs to be done there. But, when there's damage from storms or there's lighting issues, and there's all of those things, we are contributing, paying for a lot of those improvements that happen, or even just maintenance type things that come up along the way. It's the same for the pool, operation of the pool. They do operate the pool, so they provide that management for the pool, but we also have a significant cost in not just providing the water, but the chemicals, the maintenance, the replacement of the diving board, the lifeguard chairs, that all of those types of costs are also cost borne by the city. All right, so this is really brought to you for conversation today. We've answered a lot of really great questions. There's probably a lot of conversation that can still be had on all of these projects. All of them would still come back to you when they're ripe and ready to go for moving ahead with. So we offered here the opportunity to move this process ahead, which next it would go to the Planning Commission in June. They would then have discussions, and you wouldn't see it again until it came back to you after their public hearing on the CIP in August and September, or we can discuss it at another future commission meeting before the June date, if you so wish.
Well, I'll go ahead.
I was gonna say, to summarize, it costs a lot to operate a city. Okay, thank you.
One question on there, I know when we did 13th through 15th on Cedar, we did the road and also the water line at that time. Do we need, I know we're looking at Cedar 9th through 13th for special streets. Do we know if while we're looking at that, it would behoove us, because we're doing 4th through 7th, 1st through 4th? Does the water line in that area, if you're tearing up the ground, potentially in 2 years, will we be at a point where maybe doing both of those at the same time again would be advantageous, or is that chunk in better condition? Do we know?
I don't know about the water line, but all of that would be looked at as a part of the design. So part of that, there's a 2-block section in there that doesn't currently have stormwater. So that's going to be part of the design to determine whether or not it would behoove us to system. So all of that would be looked at as a portion of it, but I don't have the answer to whether the water line.
I believe you might have meant stormwater. That's the
Oh, yeah.
look
Yeah.
at that entire area there is stormwater and street.
Yeah.
And so with stormwater, then the answer is yes. We just study to see whether it needs to.
And do we know, have we had any initial conversations with OU? There's, some blocks there that, but their property and, as we drive down Cedar, a lot of the parking that is on that road is students on campus, or some potential options with them to potentially look at avenues to partner with them. Potentially something creative to potentially get those cars off of the road and onto.
With their master plan and their construction program, they currently are in the process of designing and implementing, constructing a parking area, particularly off of 11th Street, that I think would certainly remove a number of, potentially remove some, if not, I won't say that.
Yeah.
Would you like for us to move this on to the Planning Commission process, or would you like to have further conversation about it?
I would be okay with sending it on to the Planning Commission.
Sounds good. Do you have consensus?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We will go on to item 11C.
Consider the land use agreement for the city of Ottawa, parcel located at 2706 Kingman Road between the city and JC Freedom Enterprises.
The agreement is between the city and the tenant JC Freedom Enterprises LLC. And we have city manager Silcotta addressing.
And, City Attorney Finch has drafted these documents and can also answer any questions that you have. But the long and the short of it is, we acquired this property in 2023. We approved an almost identical agreement, less the dates. Last year at about this time, it was in May, and it's located adjacent to our existing boundary line, but in the unincorporated side. And so by the 2010 ordinance, that was reclassified to match city C3 General Commercial District, which does play a role in fireworks sales. And the use of the property and the terms of the land use agreement also are designed and structured to conform to our current zoning regulations. And here's a map of the system, or the what we're looking to do with K59 or US 59 and Kingman Road, with the oval that's been striated to indicate where the tent, the fireworks cell tent be located, which matches years past. And with that, I'll defer direct City Attorney Finch if he has any comments.
No, this is the same process, same parties as last year. 10 days. Worth of- Well, the people on the LinkedIn there, we had no issues last year.
And that's from June 15th to July 10th, and we'll receive on June 15th the $1,500 annual payment we did last year. And then they'll obviously have to return the land to its natural condition.
It's that distance between any buildings is all statute. I mean, I don't know how many feet that is between that tent and that building there, but
It's a temporary use, so yeah,
it doesn't matter. See a propane tank there, we can. One big firework.
So it's zoned C3 for this commercial district for the city, but it is not within city limits, being an unincorporated Franklin County. Correct.
And so with that, obviously the legal considerations, the city attorney approves the form as he was the drafter of the document, and the financial considerations are is obviously we would receive the $1,500 on June 15th for the item for the allowing the tenant to sell the fireworks there. And then staff's recommendation would be to approve and authorize the execution of the agreement.
I so move.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Late discussion, I would like to throw into this, I'd like to at some point discuss looking at selling fireworks within the city limits, and what that may potentially like, since it does tie to this.
Get that on an upcoming agenda.
May I have roll call vote, please?
Yeah, how do you vote? I believe Commissioner Kayla's offline.
Correct.
Commissioner Crowley,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Clayton,
Yes.
Commissioner Skidmore,
Yes.
and Mayor Allen.
Yes, motion carries. That'll move us to 11D.
Transient gas tax charter ordinance, self-administration.
The governing body will consider a charter ordinance to allow local administration of the transient gas tax, and we have City Attorney Finch here.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Last fall, you approved a charter ordinance to allow the city to levy a transient gas tax. In December, you passed an ordinary ordinance setting the rate of that transient gas tax. We had specified in the first charter ordinance that the Kansas Department of Revenue would collect the transient gas tax here in Ottawa. They are unwilling to do so, despite the clear legal authority for the city to implement a transient gas tax, because it is their position that because you're using your home rule authority to charter out of a state statute, they're not obligated to collect the tax on the city's behalf. Never mind the fact that the Kansas Department of Revenue collects sales taxes from multiple jurisdictions all of the time. There are multiple sales tax rates in every city that has a transportation development district or a CID district. Even TIF proceeds can be used in terms of sales tax, but we've had conversations with the League of Municipalities about bringing forward legislation to fix this problem. Require KDOR to collect the transient guest tax from every jurisdiction who uses their authority to do so under the state constitution. That won't happen until next year, and then you're waiting and beholden to what the whims of the legislature might be. So the only way to amend a charter ordinance in the state of Kansas is to pass another charter ordinance. So what we brought you here is a charter ordinance to self-administer the transient guest tax here in the city of Ottawa. This is modeled off of law from the city of Leavenworth, who does the same thing. Both their county and their city has a transient guest tax there. And so we have brought you this charter ordinance for your consideration. This ratifies the first charter ordinance. The only difference here is the means of enforcement and the provisions for penalties for late payment, et cetera. You didn't have those before because you were just writing on the state statute. So now you have substitute provisions on those points. But this does keep intact both the original charter ordinance and the ordinary ordinance, which set the rate. So the 6% would go forward. If you would pass this, it would be published twice. There would be a 61-day protest period. At the end of that period, if there is no protest, it would go into law, and we'd be looking at collections first occurring in the month of August of 2025 for the transient guest tax. So that's kind of a summary. I'll stand for any questions you may have, and then you can consider action on this today or put it forward to a future meeting.
Any questions?
Madam Mayor, I'll move to approve item 11D as listed on our agenda.
Do we have a second?
Let me just say, I still like the 6%, but we're not talking about that today. We're primarily talking about changing the ordinance so that we can collect it.
Well, I don't know. I'm not against having this done. I just think this might be one of those items that we wait another week to.
And does it affect the
So the timeline, if you still want to make the August 1st implementation, ideally would be either today or a week from now. So you do have another week of time to consider. If you choose not to go forward, it simply means that we would not be collecting the transient guest tax. So that's, if you're asking if we choose not to do this, what happens? You will have a transient guest tax on the books that you are not collecting. And I think it was about $360,000 for the 6%. So perfectly fine to wait a week if you want to wait a week. This doesn't change any of those material terms from before. It simply gives us the collection avenue here locally. So happy to wait. And if you think of questions, happy to answer those if you have them. If you proceed today, again, still looking at August 1, either day.
I mean, I'm totally for the collection of the transient guest tax. I voted for it. I voted for the 6%. I just, this is a new item that we're looking at for the first time, and certainly would appreciate a little bit more time. Not that I'm the lawyer, you are, but the public, is seeing it, maybe for the first time too. And if they have any questions, we could certainly respond to those questions.
The Constitution and our local ordinances give you all the power to decide these things, not me as the attorney or the city manager or any other staff member. So you have to be the ones that are secure in the decision that you make, and we're certainly happy to wait. And that's why we brought it forward today, so that you would have that time to take a second look at it if you wanted to.
Well, with no pressing date, we can review it again next week and vote on it. Then Commissioner Kaler will probably be here and be able to give her vote as well at that.
Do we need to notate anything about the motion that there wasn't a second?
If you want to withdraw your motion.
Sure,
there was no
yeah,
second.
withdraw, yeah. Thanks, guys.
And
Y'all voted.
and we'll be here to answer questions next week.
Okay.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you. That'll move us to 11E.
Bid award for mowing service.
The governing body will consider awarding the bid for mowing services based on the submitted proposals and evaluation of service needs for 2025 season, and Director Welsh will present it.
I feel like you guys have been waiting to see me at this point.
Bated breath.
So, what I'm bringing to you guys today is a grounds maintenance contract that we've been doing annually since 2021. So, a little in the past,
the city has maintained several pieces of ground. One way or the other, it just kind of got pushed off in at least the Parks Department to maintain some of these grounds. Well, really none of them relate to the Parks Department at all, but, so it kind of was whose responsibility is to do these jobs, and then, how do you take care of all these extra grounds while you still maintain the grounds that you're responsible for and make everything look. So fast forward to probably 2017, 2018, we tried to hire some seasonals to just maintain this ground. At that point, it was really difficult to hire on seasonals, and then when you did hire on seasonals, they were even more to be able to transport around and maintain these. So in 2021, we decided that we were going to try to just contract these out, and it's been really successful since then. We've had we put it out for bid every single year, and 3 out of the 5 years now, we've gotten multiple bids back. 2 of them, we only got 1 bid, including this year, we only got 1 bid back. But each year, we've had the same response, or we've hired the same person. You know, they were always the most competitive bid. We've been very happy with the work that they've provided us up to this point. So the properties, as you can see here, we're talking about the right-of-ways along both sides of 68 Highway on the east and west side, getting you from the overpass bridge all the way up to North 8. There are 10 vacant city-owned lots around the city that would be a part of this that the city owns. The salt shed over there on Second and Beach, that area there, that's kind of right across from the police department, fire department area. Included in this for the last couple of years have been right-of-ways on the Proximity Park. And then there's also a right-of-way along 13th Street and Eisenman. That's the short list of what we're talking about. We did put out an RFP and got the response back. Johnson Lawn Care was the only one that did respond. He, like I mentioned before, he is the one that has done this work for us every single year. We've been happy with it up to this point. So we have seen no reason to not move forward with them. Since 2021, we've budgeted for this. Typically, it's come out of a different fund, but this year we've transferred it over to the street fund. So, but there is money there that has been budgeted for this service. So, what we're looking for today, I know that last week, Mayor, that you mentioned that maybe we would like to put some of these new things off for an extra week. I would request that we try to get some action today, just because the grass is growing and we need to get some of it taken. We would look for you guys to give us the okay to move forward with this RFP for Johnson.
Director Elsh, along the line of the grass growing, City of Ottawa's equipment, are they mostly mulchers or are they actually just lawn mowers?
They are not mulching mowers, but they are rear discharge.
Okay.
We switched over to rear discharge a number of years back just to eliminate the possibility of throwing grass out into the street, throwing it onto cars, but the majority of the mowing is taking place where people are. So trying to eliminate, the possibility.
And the reason I asked that question is because a couple of years ago, a comment was made that we were using mostly mulchers, and when the grass started to get taller, obviously, you're having issues discharging or leaving, all sorts of grass behind. And if we don't have the right equipment to be doing things like this and hiring somebody who might, certainly that's another reason to move forward with somebody else instead of doing it ourselves.
You are right. So with the rear discharge mower, it does not, throw it out the side of the chute like what you would typically see on your lawnmower. So if the grass does get a little bit higher, if it gets wet, it does leave clumps behind. So yes, in that situation.
Well, I'd make the motion, we approve 11E on our agenda.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? May I have roll call vote, please?
How do you vote, Mayor Pro Tem Clayton?
Yes.
Commissioner Skidmore?
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor is absent. Commissioner Crowley?
Yes.
And Mayor Allen.
And I vote yes. The motion carries. Thank you. That'll move us on to item 12, comments by our city manager.
Very brief today, as I anticipated a long meeting. This is our tentative agenda, less the continued transient guest tax discussion. But we'll have a police week proclamation. We'll also have one for public service. You'll receive and file the 2025 or 2024 audit report, and then you'll have some review of the street plan as well as some development issues to approve or consider for approval.
I do have a question. Director Neese, about a month ago, I asked you about 740 South Ash. I've noticed that there's been some more debris out front. Do you have an update on that?
We have begun the process. This afternoon, we are a month from our first letter. 3 letters before the process gets in high gear, unfortunately. From my perspective.
But there is some movement? I mean, on our
We're
behalf.
certainly, yeah, we're moving on our side, and
Okay.
we're making clear that I want to be judicious, but we were very clear that that we have a process in place.
Sure, and I want to be judicious too. I also want to, think about the neighbors that, as I drove by the other day, there were some kids out front playing. Certainly, I'm concerned about whether somebody's living in the camper and back, and that's a major, road for incoming people that's not in our community, and it's a blighted property for sure, so,
I appreciate it.
yeah, thank you.
We'll move on to item 13, comments by our governing body. We'll start with Commissioner Crowley.
I have no comments.
Commissioner Skidmore. Pro Tem Clayton.
I've talked enough.
Okay. And I don't think I have anything either. So we'll move on to announcements. We have May 7th, 7 p.m. City Commission meeting here at City Hall. May 14th, a 4 p.m. City Commission meeting. May 21st, a 10 a.m. City Commission meeting, and May 28th, a 4 p.m. City Commission meeting. With no other business before us, I will adjourn.